Alright guys, the time is now for a showdown between Norsca, who's going to be led by Throg the Troll King, and the Empire, who's going to be led by Karl Franz. So without further ado, let's jump right into this match and have some fun. So here in the front line, we do have a combination of Berserkers and Marauder champions. So the reason I bring champions, and on paper you're going to be like, okay, the champions are pretty expensive, they don't have shields, the Empire has really good powder and means of focusing them down, but I feel like the metagame for the Empire has been shifting in regards to this matchup, as well as a couple others, like the Vampire counts. So when Norsca first came out, the early days of Norsca and the advent of Mortal Empires, I feel like a lot of Empire players would go relatively wide. They'd be using a bunch of handgunners and powder units to focus you down. But now you really only see the silver bullets and maybe Sterling's Revenge kind of lurking in the shadows. And you see a really heavy front line. So instead of seeing like spearmen and chaff units to kind of hold back Norsca, they've been using greatswords and really taking the fight to you. So I've been seeing this quite a bit. As such, I've switched up my Norsca build quite a bit. In the front line, we do have two Marauder champs with great weapons to deal with greatswords, and they do very well against greatswords. They have better stats, they have a really high weapon strength, they have a nice charge bonus of 30, and we have two Berserkers on the wings. And the reason I have it like this is because most Empire players, I've literally played against this build like 3 or 4 times or something similar to this. You see two greatswords on the flanks, you see two greatswords in the center, and then on the flanks you see like the cheaper stuff. So I find that having the Berserkers on the wings to kind of go after the cheap stuff, and the heart of my army being the champions to go after the greatswords, has worked pretty well. On the far sides of our formation, we do have two groups of Marauder Spears to help deal with heavy cav. And I've kind of been treating this like the Bretonnia matchup a little bit. So I do have 3 groups of Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, very good against Greatswords, Demogryph Knights, Empire Knights, Knights of the Blazing Sun. Now, they're very vulnerable against like missile play and handgunners, but if you're very cautious and use them to sit back and just pick off the heavy cav and Karl Franz and targets like that, they do very, very well. On top of that, we do have the Famir Balefiend with the Lore of Shadows. We have the Miststalkers. So the Miststalkers are very solid because they do have pretty good missile resist of 22% from the mists. And on top of that, they do have Stalk. So your opponent can't really focus them down until the last second. They have good mass, they have good combat stats, very good at dealing with cav, and just a solid unit all around. Now, this is another pick that, if you look at my old videos against Norsca, it might seem a little bit heretical here. Well, I guess Throg is heretical regardless, but he's really good against heavy cav as well as Karl Franz. Now, my opponent does have some missile play, but I figure if I'm really careful with Throg, I use him to take out, the Demogryph Knights and the Knights of the Blazing Sun and Empire Knights. He's going to be a lot better than Wulfric. And of course, he does regenerate. And Wulfric can definitely get gooned out by Flying Lord. So if you have like Wulfric on horseback and Karl Franz comes in with just a fat, chubby Galmaraz, Wulfric's going to get put in a trash can pretty hard if he's effective at cycle charging. Now we have 2 groups of the Norscan Eifels in the back. That is pretty much it for my army. Now, for my opponent, a very aggressive Empire army. He does have greatswords in the front line. On the flanks, he does have, I think, a couple groups of spears. It looks like 3 greatswords actually in the center pocket. On top of that, he does have 2 spears on the far sides with shields. He has the Sterling's Revenge as well as the silver bullets, and a ton of heavy cav, which I've been seeing quite a bit. So Empire Knights, Royal Altar of Griffites, and he does have more Empire Knights over here. For his leadership, Karl Franz with the Reikland Runefang, as well as Galmaraz, and a Life Wizard. So it's very like heavy metal Empire, right? 95 armor here, 110 armor here, just heavy armor just mulching through you. And if you go with like Berserker and Marauder play, you just get run over. You're not going to be able to contest that front line at all. So I feel like the meta has shifted a little bit, and you definitely need to bring some champs in the front. So the battle's underway right now. You can see the Marauder Horsemaster is going to be scouting forward. I didn't see his silver bullets, obviously, so I'm going to be taking some fire here. But I do get some decent throwing axes into the greatswords, definitely chipping those guys down pretty good. And it looks like we actually do get 2 casualties, which is nice. And we do fall back before taking too much damage. The silver bullets and the Empire Knights, of course, are going to be pushing forward to try and pressure us. Ends up actually getting 6 kills and doing about 15% damage to those guys. So very, very solid stuff. So there's going to be some shifting in this battle. I don't want to be taking it right here because there's like a natural barrier that's going to kind of funnel my forces into an awkward position. So what I'm going to be doing is just harassing with the Marauder Horsemen and doing a massive shift. So I'm going to be moving my entire army over here, trying to get a more square engagement against my opponent so I can better handle his forces. In the meantime, he's also shifting his Sterling's Revenge, which I also wasn't aware of their presence yet, so they're going to be getting some good ambush shots as well. So I do charge in again with the Marauder Horsemen, trying to get some freebies. I wasn't sure where his silver bullets were, but unfortunately he stayed in the exact same position, and he gets some huge firepower here. So it takes out 1 Marauder Horseman, but does a ton of HP damage, and the Sterling's Revenge are going to be pushing in as well. So definitely not worth it. I mean, I got some damage, but yeah, he definitely came out ahead here. In the meantime, still positioning my army, trying to relocate, get everyone over here. That's always a pretty good tactic. Like, if you don't like your engagement, take your time, reposition. I mean, the battle's what? It's like a 20-minute turn timer, give or take, so you're going to have time to do that usually. And it also forces your opponent to like reset his formation. And a lot of people who play Empire, well, not necessarily Empire, but powder-centric factions are really like, they like to sit, they like to wait and play reactionary. Granted, my opponent is shifting pretty well here. So I do get a Melkos trying to get as much free damage as I can on these greatswords and give my champions the edge when the fight inevitably does come here. The Norscan Ice Wolves, I'm just keeping on the periphery of my formations, one here and one here, just waiting for the heavy cav to come in and countercharge them. In the meantime, I like this engagement because there's fours here. It's going to be a little bit less effective for these silver bullets. They're going to have to like come up to here to get those optimized shots. And Throg kind of throws up. He retches a little bit, but nothing comes out. So unfortunately, that animation just didn't go off, although it didn't use my cooldown. I can use that again. So right now, it looks like Karl Franz is thinking about coming in on Throg. I do attack him with my Marauder Horsemasters. So you can see they're going to be sweeping forward, and it looks like he is going to be falling back. So now I have a position that I think is a little bit better because, again, we have this like natural terrain, which is going to force his cav to either come through the center. I can easily screen him out with the spears, and everyone's going to be advancing right now. So the champion's going to be going up. I will be casting pendulums as well. So I saw he had this huge force right here, and here comes the pendulum just going to be going right down the formation, tearing those guys to shreds. Those Empire handgunners definitely not happy. So let's take a look at the HP. And that basically takes out like half of their HP, although they still have 59 of the 60 models, which is pretty insane, but any damage on them is just going to crumble them. So charge coming in, Empire Knights are going to be hitting my Berserkers. Not the best charge. A lot of the troops get caught up in the trees, which is partially why I wanted to do that. And the champs have engaged in the front line versus the greatswords. So some of the greatswords are very beat up from the throwing axes, and the champion's definitely going to be in pretty good shape here in this matchup. They should be able to buckle these greatswords very quickly. In the meantime, spears are going to be denying this flank right here, forcing his cav to come up and through the middle, which then pushes them into my throwing axes. And his cav did come in, so I'm just going to be sitting here with my throwing axes, just throwing at whatever I can hit. And definitely going pretty well. Champ's taking some damage, unit losing slightly, but the greatswords are definitely going to buckle first. Throg and the Famir Balefiend are in here. Berserkers, looks like he did do a bit of a fallback, but I will be charging them in. And also I do have my spearmen trying to compromise his flanks. They're going to be getting in there, but we mashed those greatswords in the front line. So we're able to buckle those guys. And now my Famir, which I was keeping in reserves, I wanted him to kind of use his handgunners elsewhere, are going to be charging in. So now they're revealed. Karl Franz does charge in, and we have a pretty heavy pit fight here. So you can see the champions are fighting against the Demogryph Knights, and this is where like Throg is going to be a lot better, right? He can like just massacre these Demogryph Knights. I mean, obviously they would beat him probably one-on-one in an open field, but here supported with his troops and champions and other heavy-duty weapons like the Famir coming in with armor sundering, we're not in bad shape here. So the Norscan Ice Wolf is going to be jumping in as well, attacking Karl Franz. A very good Earthblood from my opponent here going down. But this is where the throwing axes are so good. I mean, it's basically like playing against Bretonnia. Just switch your build as if it were Bretonnia, and I think it's going to be pretty good for sure. So here we get the throwing axes. Karl Franz taking a ton of damage. The Royal Outdoor Gryphites, normally able to just run free range over Berserkers and Marauders, are taking a ton of damage from spears and champions, and the Famir are just piling in and just clubbing these guys. You can see the Demogryph Knights being dragged down. The Famir are in very, very good shape here, and the Berserkers are able to kill the chaff on the wings. And yeah, the Empire Knights, when they did come in, they tried to retreat, but the Norscan Ice Wolves were able to freeze them, frostbite those bad boys down to 43 speed, so they can't really get away now, so they have to fight. That's why those wolves are so damn good. And if you're like facing off against Bretonnia with this build, essentially, you do the same thing. When the Bretonian heavy cav charges your infantry, you just countercharge them with the Norscan Ice Wolves, you frostbite them and attack them with throwing axes. And the same thing happened back here. The Empire Knights came back, tried to do some business. They got dragged down by the mass amounts of throwing axes and the Ice Wolves. It's an incredibly powerful synergy. So over here, you can see the Spearmen with shields do have the Shield of Thorns, it looks like, but Big Daddy Throg is going to be karate kicking. Come on, let's give us a kick, Throg. Throg loves his kicks, for sure. He throws that little stubby leg out and gives some business. But the Famir are piling in, and the Spearmen are just going to be in full route here in the forest. Now, the balance of power pretty heavily in my favor at this point, but we still have some Empire forces to hunt down. The champions are going to be chasing the greatswords here, re-engaging with the rallying greatswords, who are not in good shape. Berserkers also charging in, waving their axes in the air. And we will be using a Melkos Mystifying Miasma to try and do some damage to those Sterling's Revenge. So, Karl Franz, definitely a good tactic here as you fall back, pick apart the advancing Norscan forces. But the Hounds are coming in here, a lot of trouble for my opponent here. The Greatswords are collapsing down to 21 models, and there's just tides and tides of Norscan troops coming out of the forest here. Throg, of course, is very, very healthy, able to regenerate a lot of the damage. The Empire Knights coming in for a charge with the Reikland Runefang, definitely a very, very cool thematic thing here. But there's just too much Norsca left. You can see there's just tides of Berserkers, Famir Balefiends, the throwing axes are all in okay shape. I mean, they're a little bit beat up, but you're able to just really counter the heavy cav. And I mean, I could have brought Famir with Great Weapons, but I really felt like the Miststalkers serve a little bit of a better dual purpose in this matchup versus Greatswords. Plus, they still do really well versus cav. So in the meantime, the Marauder Horsemen are going to be chasing down the Sterling's Revenge. I think going to be getting some of that booty right here. The Revenge are very powerful, and Karl Franz is going to be sweeping over as well. He's going to be able to probably tear out these guys. So as such, I do just run right away. I just wanted to kind of keep them busy, keep them from being able to set their feet. And now the Doggos are going to be chasing just a huge horde of Norskins Berserkers, 69 models, that's what she said. They're all in pretty good shape. And Karl Franz can't really land safely because whenever he does land, he's going to be taking all these axes to the dome. So at this point, it's a bit of a rout. We're just going to be chasing down the forces. But the main thing is I just wanted to show you guys this matchup and this build. And I have been playing against Empire players, and I was using my Norscan build that I had originally devised to deal with a wider Empire with handgunners and more kind of low-tier infantry. And a lot of people were bringing this heavy metal Empire build. And I was like, man, this is really just crushing my other Norscan build. So I had to adapt a little bit, and I was like, okay, just kind of treat it like Bretonia, right? Because they're using heavy cav, you're using, basically like foot squires, right? As well as in these great swords. And I found that it works pretty well. So Throg still is a risky pick, but again, he's going to be good versus Karl and the heavy lords. On top of that, he's good against great swords and knights. You just have to be very careful against these Sterling's Revenge and the silver bullets. But I feel like if you get really good pendulums and hound pressure in the back line, you're usually going to be pretty safe. The champions, I think, are the right pick. Berserkers, of course, very, very good against the spearmen and other chaff units. And the Miststalkers could probably solo a couple groups of great swords. So they're just an incredibly solid pick here. And the stock also helps them avoid missile attacks. And when they do take those missile attacks, they have the really good missile resist. So definitely think it's a pretty solid anti-Empire build. If you're expecting a build like this, granted, if they went like super wide and just had like a bunch of concaving fire, like you would just get punished pretty bad. So that's kind of the thing about the game. It is a little bit tough, and a lot of battles can be won in the selection screen. Granted, I think my opponent's build could have done it as well. Let's see. So yeah, Karl Franz, that pendulum was definitely pretty rough. It's a hard one. I think the Norsca, if you come with this type of a build, is definitely going to have the advantage here. But that is a very strong Empire build. The Cav can do really good against the Berserkers. Things can get pretty messy. So very well played to my opponent, Unity Athos. Look forward to running into you again on ladder. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this Norse vs. Empire build. Have an excellent night, guys, and take care.